Hello everyone, and welcome to the Burdekin Hotel here on Oxford Street. It's so wonderful that we can all be here in person today and have this important conversation about the future of Oxford Street. I'm Monica Shafter. I'm an ABC journalist. I'm the lead of ABC Queer and the host of the Innies and Outies podcast. I'm really proud to be your host for today. Before we get into it, I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional owners of the land that we're on, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. I'd also like to acknowledge the LGBTQ+ pioneers of human rights. 43 years ago in 1978, a group of courageous protesters took a stand against homophobia, transphobia and prejudice, and they marched down this very street. They endured violence at the hands of police, but their efforts ignited a major civil rights movement here in Australia and evolved into what we today know as Mardi Gras. So let's give a round of applause to the LGBTQI rights pioneers. Welcome also to our guests who are watching here on Facebook. Welcome to all members of our beautifully diverse LGBTQIA+ community. Thank you so much for coming here today. I'd also like to thank the Star Observer for putting on today's event. Happy 42nd anniversary to a news outlet that has been documenting the lives and milestones of queer Australians since 1979. That's a year after that very first Mardi Gras street protest. Oxford Street is one of the world's most iconic queer streets. It sits in the middle of the largest concentration of LGBTQ+ people in Australia. After years of neglect, the street is in desperate need of a makeover. Plans are afoot to redevelop Oxford Street. What happens on our street is important to us as a community and we need to speak up about it. And today we are hosting a panel discussion on the future of Oxford Street. Joining you, our amazing community, are 5 esteemed panellists, and we're incredibly grateful that they could join us here today. Please join me in welcoming City of Sydney Lord Mayor, Clover Moore. Independent Member for Sydney, New South Wales MP Alex Greenwich. CEO of Sydney World Pride 2023, Kate Wickett. Publisher of the Star Observer, Lawrence Gibbons. And Chair of the Steering Committee for Sydney Queer Space, David Paulson. Andrew Gorman-Murray sends his apologies. He was going to be here today as well. He's Professor of Geography at Western Sydney Uni. He's a bit unwell, so couldn't be here today, so apologies from Andrew. So in terms of how this afternoon is going to run, our guests will each share an opening statement about their connection to Oxford Street and their feelings on today's topic. So the question that we're looking at is, should Oxford Street be preserved as a historic, cultural, commercial and tourist precinct for the LGBTQIA+ community? I'll then put some questions to our panellists, and that will include some fantastic questions that a lot of you folks have submitted on the lead up to today. And then we'll also open the floor to a live Q&A. So, think about your questions as we're having this chat, and we'll make sure we come to those at the end. I believe Mel will have a mic and put your hand up and go over there, and we'll get to all those. Okay, to start us off, I would like to invite City of Sydney Lord Mayor, Clover Moore, to please give her opening statement.
So, as Monica said, we've been asked to answer the question, should Oxford Street be preserved as an historic, cultural, commercial and tourist precinct for the LGBTIQ+ community? And the answer, of course, is a resounding yes. At our last meeting, Council supported my mayoral minute to develop an LGBTIQ+ cultural and social place strategy for the Oxford Street precinct. Sydney would be the first city in Australia to implement policies that protect the historical and cultural identity of the precinct. And in doing so, we would be joining New York, San Francisco, Chicago and London. This is an important work as we work towards World Pride in 2023, the biggest event for Sydney since the Olympics. Over the coming months, we'll work with you and key community organisations, including World Pride 2023, Mardi Gras, the the Pride History Group, the Building Pride and Utopia, on how to achieve a goal which will recognise the significance of Oxford Street, the LGBTIQ plus communities, and identify important places and sites in the neighbourhood. The strategy will build on the city's work to support your communities, including flying the rainbow banners proudly in Oxford Street since 2005 and the rainbow flag at Taylor Square since 2014, transitioning now the rainbow flag to the Progress Pride flag and banners, installing the rainbow crossing at Taylor Square and the rainbow path next to Equality Green in Prince Alfred Park, providing financial and logistical support for Mardi Gras, supporting World Pride 2023 bid with a 750,000 cash sponsorships, supporting LGBTIQ plus community organisations through our grants and sponsorship programs, promoting Wear It Purple Day, the Transgender Day of Visibility and Transgender Day of Remembrance. The city's draft Oxford Street planning proposal, which is currently on exhibition until next Friday, the 5th of November, is a review of the planning control rules for Oxford Street and surrounds to secure the precinct's creative and cultural future. Development of an LGBTIQ plus cultural and social strategy for Oxford Street will complement this work by addressing issues that can't be addressed by planning controls, planning controls that really just set a framework for land use and development. Planning controls cannot compel building owners to operate or specify what kinds of businesses can lease their premises. Community comments will help inform both the final planning controls and the LGBTIQ plus Oxford Street cultural and social strategy. And it is important that we hear from you. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Clover. Alex, I'll now hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Mon. Can I thank everybody for being here today? Thank you to Lawrence in the Star Observer for being so persistent to make sure this event happened. I know it was postponed once or twice, and it's great that we're able to do it here in person and on Oxford Street. Oxford Street, like for everybody here, holds a really special place in my heart. It was the first place I kissed a guy was in Stonewall on Oxford Street. I remember, a week after my now husband and I first met, we were actually here at the Burdekin at a big Halloween party. I have marched proudly up and down Oxford Street, not only for Mardi Gras, but for so many important protests for our community. This is a sacred ground for the LGBTI community, and we have experienced a number of challenges. Obviously, we all know that the Clearway's gone in, we've got Westfields at both ends. We have had significant challenges on the way in which parts of our community have gone online to meet each other rather than meet in person in bars. But I'm really hopeful that this is all changing. I'm really hopeful that throughout COVID, we know we need that human interaction, that human connection, and we're wanting to come out to the bars, to the restaurants, and to support our community more than ever. Not only the city's planning process for Oxford Street, but the cultural strategy is an amazing opportunity for us to make sure we shape an Oxford Street for the future, which is welcoming and inclusive of the entire LGBTQI plus community, which sees significant investment from the private sector and which continues to celebrate and support our community. So I thank you all for your engagement in this, and I thank you all for your passion in protecting Oxford Street, but also in supporting it to really see it flourish into the future, to be the amazing sacred place that we all know and love.
Thank you very much, Alex. Over to you, CEO, Sydney World Pride 2023, Kate Wickett.
Thank you, Mon, and thank you for all the work you do for our community as well. Reflecting on the discussion around the importance of Oxford Street, I put my lens of Mardi Gras on, and Mardi Gras was born 150 metres up the road in Oxford Street. That will always have a resonance for everyone. It was born here, it is our spiritual home as Mardi Gras. And from a personal perspective, Oxford Street means many things to many people, just as Mardi Gras does. My own personal experience was as a 19-year-old. I grew up in a small country town called Adelaide. And I felt very alone and very, isolated from a community of LGBTI people. Someone said to me, come to Sydney. I was 19, I was at university, I was picked up from the airport on Wednesday before the Saturday of the parade, and I was brought directly over here, 150 metres up the road to the corner of Crown and Oxford Street, and I stood in front of the Columbian, and for the first time as I looked up Oxford Street, heaving with people, colour, courage, kind people, and bears holding hands in hand. And for the first time I felt what it was to feel community. That was over 20 years ago. I don't want to age myself, but that was over 20 years ago. It not only changed my life, it saved my life. I promised myself that day that I would do everything I could for our community so that no one would ever feel as alone or as isolated as I did. To be involved with Mardi Gras and to be involved with Sydney World Pride is an utter privilege. It's a huge responsibility, and it's something that the team at World Pride and at Mardi Gras constantly look back on. What are we doing for our community? How do we cherish our community? How do we pay homage to our community? And some of you are here today. Thank you for your courage and your conviction in the past. Oxford Street is the spiritual home of Mardi Gras and will always be the spiritual home. And it is upon us now, that you in the room and all of us around Australia, and particularly Sydney, we must pay homage to Mardi Gras and we must protect it. We must protect Oxford Street. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Kate. Over to you, Lawrence, publisher of Star Observer.
A year ago, the Star Observer was briefed by Ash Morgan, the property developers who now own council buildings on the north side of Oxford Street, between Whitman Square, where we're almost gathered today, and Taylor Square, which is a half-kilometre down the road. For over a century, many of the buildings on this side of the road were council-owned until last year when they were privatized by the City of Sydney. After listening to Ash Morgan's plans for boutique hotels, deluxe offices, and upmarket shops, I asked why there had been no mention of the LGBT community in a briefing to the Star Observer. On the condition of anonymity, the representative confided there had been plans for an LGBT Pride Center, which were scrapped when council told Ash Morgan not to worry about incorporating it into their plans.
Shame.
A few months later, at the end of last year, the city asked residents what we wanted to see happen on Oxford Street. An overwhelming 83% of all respondents, we stated that we wanted to see Oxford Street's LGBT identity preserved. Last month, the city put its new planning controls for Oxford Street on exhibition. The Oxford Street Creative and Cultural Precinct LEP barely mentions our LGBT community. While incentives are offered to developers for creative and cultural uses, LGBTQI uses go unmentioned. It is no wonder the plans for the Pride Center were scrapped. The basis for the new Oxford Street LEP is the Oxford Street Cultural Quarter Action Plan, which dates way back to 2009 when I served as the president of the Darlinghurst Business Partnership. As a result, I have a vintage copy of the actual plan in hard copy form. If anyone wants to borrow it, enjoy. I think the PDF is available on the site also. Anyway, for over a decade, the Cultural Action Plan has been the cornerstone for the city's various attempts to revitalize Oxford Street, from phantom grocery stores that never came in, to tendencies for pop-ups, to laneway revitalizations. The Cultural Quarter Plan has not worked, in large part, in my opinion, because council never built on the precinct's unique LGBT identity. Bearing in mind that Darlinghurst and Surrey Hills are home to the largest concentration of LGBT people anywhere in Australia. For a decade, the 2009 Action Plan hasn't kickstarted Oxford Street, and now it is being used as a Trojan horse for developers to increase height limits while not promoting our precinct's unique LGBT identity, heritage, or culture. The original 2009 plan there, which called on the city to develop and support LGBT culture. It asked the city to build on the precinct's LGBT history, to attract more LGBT community groups to the precinct, all as an integral way to revitalize the Oxford Street precinct. None of these recommendations have been seriously implemented and have not been included in the Oxford Street LEP. The Lord Mayor's recent pledge to develop an LGBTQ+ cultural and social place strategy for Oxford Street is incredibly welcome. Thank you, Lord Mayor. But the immediate plans for the redevelopment of former council-owned buildings must incorporate a pride center, probably a museum as well, from my friend David. Developers must receive incentives to provide LGBT-specific community and cultural space as part of the new LEP that is currently on exhibition. Doing so would help preserve Oxford Street's queer identity and would fulfill the original objectives of the 2009 Oxford Street Action Plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Lawrence. There will be an opportunity to respond or comment on some of the things that Lawrence has said in just a minute. Before that, I'd like to hand to David Polson, Chair of the Steering Committee of the Sydney Quiz Days.
Thanks, Mon. I represent Utopia Sydney, a group dedicated to forming a permanent queer space in Sydney. Utopia Sydney will primarily be an HIV/AIDS memorial, but it will also include a tribute to those who suffered oppression, discrimination, persecution for their sexuality and gender identity. We hope to include a safe, inclusive space for all our queer communities and their allies, with a strong emphasis on education and celebration. Sydney is the only major city in the world that doesn't have such a space. Melbourne has its magnificent Pride Centre. But Sydney has an enormously rich and proud queer history. And unfortunately, unless something's done about it very soon, it will sink into the abyss of time and be forgotten forever. Now, we cannot let this happen. Our present and our future is tied up to our past. Our present victories didn't happen overnight. They took decades of hard, painful work, and we must honour those people. But we also must celebrate the fun times when we developed this wonderful, vibrant community that the whole world we were the envy of the whole world. But then came the devastation of HIV/AIDS. But as a community, we refuse to be weakened or destroyed, drowned but not destroyed. We refuse to be weakened or destroyed by this virus. We as a community rose up to the challenge, along with the support from the federal government, incredible medical and nursing help, the love and care of the Sisters of Charity, St Vincent's Hospital, and countless others. We created a much envied and much replicated response to HIV/AIDS. Personally, as someone who was impacted by HIV/AIDS right from the early days, I have never ever seen such an outpouring of love, care and support from the community as I saw during those days. It was amazing. We can never forget that. Utopia Sydney aims to be a permanent memorial to this response, and also a space, a welcoming, safe space for all, where we can, with the view of creating a accepting, caring and empowered Australia. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. So I have quite an eclectic list of questions here, again, sourced from our wonderful community. Before I get into those, would anyone like to comment on any of the opening remarks that folks have made up here? Clover? Yeah.
I would. I reject what Lawrence said about the city rejecting a Pride Museum. In fact, the city voted on whether or not there should be a Pride Museum in 2014 and supported it. And it supported on the basis that it had to be community supported and community led and get adequate funding from federal and state governments and perhaps philanthropic funding and perhaps commercial funding. And there have been Pride Centre proposals that have come and gone and they've collapsed. I mean, Mardi Gras was doing one for a while and said it wasn't core work. And it's really truly that David Paulson is here now and he's talking about how to actually do it. So I reject that Ash Morgan would have said that, because we actually have a vote at the city committing to that, and we have a record of supporting this community since I have been mayor, and of supporting initiatives. But we think we support community-driven initiatives, not ones that we have to oversee ourselves. It's not our role to run a museum, it's our role to run the city and to support the city communities in every possible way that we can.
Thank you. I'm keen to hear what other members of the panel think about the idea of a Pride Museum or LGBT History Museum. Kate, what do you think about that?
I do agree with the Lord Mayor that the city and the state, or the city particularly, have supported Mardi Gras, absolutely, and without the city support we would not be able to run Mardi Gras. A museum, yes, and I reflect on the Pride Centre in Melbourne. And the business case for that Pride Centre, I haven't seen, but what I do know is that the City of Port Phillip gifted that piece of land to the Pride Centre. An incredibly generous gift, but it had that piece of land. I wonder, and I've considered this a lot, a Pride Centre, is it a museum? Is it a consolidation or a group of different services? Is it a health centre? Is it a museum? Is it a place of people coming together? Maybe it's all of those things. Maybe they're not mutually exclusive. I do think that there needs to be more work done in our community, and certainly as Mardi Gras we did speak to a number of our members about a Pride Centre, where should it be? And frankly there was difference of opinion about where that should be. Certainly Oxford Street is, as I said, the spiritual home of Mardi Gras. But the thing I think we need to remember, and this is reflected in the audience today, where are the L's? Where are the B's and where are the T's? Because I look out here now and I see a lot of white gay men. So where are the L's and the B's and the T's? And why have they moved out to Newtown or Marrickville? Why do they not feel comfortable here anymore? And I think we've got some more systemic questions to answer about where our community is and what our community is now in 2021. So it's easy, well, it's not an easy discussion around where a Pride Centre should be, and certainly I think there are many considerations. Is it a library? Is it a museum? Is it a health centre? Is it a place of celebration? And again, I don't think those things are mutually exclusive, but I do think it's a very complex answer, and I think we can do some more work in our community. And I would like to hear from the L's and the B's and the T's.
Thank you, those are absolutely valid comments. And I'd just like to say that at Qtopia we have been working very methodically, very slowly, developing plans for this. We are at a stage, we had a meeting with PricewaterhouseCoopers on Friday, a workshop, and we had to sit down and talk exactly what you said. We had to nut it down, we had to drill down to find out exactly what we want Qtopia to be. We're steering away from the word museum because that has such huge connotations with money, what we put in there. So is it going to be a health centre? Is it going to be an AIDS memorial? What is it going to be? So we're doing a lot of work on that, and we would welcome any thoughts from you people and anyone on what you feel it should be. But we are working on it, and we'll be having a workshop again, Johnny, and on the 13th of November we'll be sitting down for a couple of hours and drilling down, finding out exactly what it is. Before we even think about where it's going to be, we have to know exactly what we want, and this is our main objective at the moment. So any thoughts would be very helpful. So please let me know. Thank you.
Thank you. Alex.
Thank you, David. And the work David is doing with Futopia is so important. I've met with your team a number of times. We will inevitably meet again a number of times. And I just want to build on Kate's point. You know, I think it's critical as we look obviously as we look to the future of Oxford Street and you know, of this, you know, cultural home that we have, we obviously have to be strengthened by the past and strengthened by the history of Oxford Street and the battles and the challenges that we have faced, from, you know, the AIDS crisis to discrimination, the marriage equality campaign, and we still have those battles, and Oxford has always been a critical part of that, and that always needs to be remembered and celebrated. But we do, as we look forward to the future, need to make sure that this is a discussion that is inclusive of all of our community, not just, you know, as Kate said, white gay men.
And I love you.
But I think to be honest, we have dominated the conversation about Oxford Street. We actually need to hear from trans and gender non-binary people. We need to hear from the entire spectrum about the spaces that they need to feel welcome, that they need to feel safe. And that really needs to be a critical priority as we go forward to identifying not what I hope will not just be one space. I hope there will be multiple spaces. And the city's planning proposals do provide room for that, for multiple creative spaces, for multiple cultural spaces for our community and all of our diversity. You know, we really have to think to the future. We have to be strengthened from the past. But when we think to the future, you know, ideally, Lawrence has done a great job with this panel. Ideally, we should have a panel which has people who are trans, who are non-binary, who are people of colour. This is a you know, a very white male-dominated panel, and I think we have to make sure that we really amplify those voices, because that will be the success of Oxford Street into the future. To make sure that we practice what we preach, and that we are inclusive of everybody.
100%. And I must say that putting the panel together was really built around preserving the cultural history and identity of Oxford Street, and for better or worse, it has been tied to the gay male community that lives around and is inhabited. But I want to go back to the question of a museum and conflating it with the Pride Center. First off, I completely agree with Clover Moore in relation to the history of putting a history museum at the T2 building. It was a failed venture from the start. There was not we, the community, were not there to do it, right? And good for David for coming forth to put that work in. We have not anteed up to do that. But that is separate to the question of what is happening on Oxford Street now. What is happening on Oxford Street right now is that there is a local environment plan put forth that gives incentives to developers to provide community space in exchange for the right to go up an additional 10% or 2 stories. The problem that I have, and that the Star Observer has, and people we've spoken to have, is that nowhere in the LAP is LGBT use identified, or nor is the community spelled out. And look, all I can say is that when I'm sitting in a meeting with Ash Morgan and they tell me that there had been plans to create a Pride Center as use for that space, and I'm not going to betray confidence and say who, and I'm not going to say, you know, who told them this, because it's irrelevant. What matters is that this LEP is there, and that the mechanism is there for the developer to provide community space for us, for our community to preserve our identity, and going forward, that is my interest. It is not in seeing dance studios and basket weaving spaces. I want to see places for our community groups. And just the final point, we are just about to move into our little space in the Pride Center in Victoria. And what Kate says, and because we have a Melbourne Star Observer edition also, and what Kate says is absolutely right, that the local council donated a plot of land that was worth something like $7 million, and the state government amped up a lot of money for it to be constructed. But more importantly than all of that, The community made it happen. The community lobbied the politicians, lobbied the government, right, and kept the pressure on. And like it or not, folks, we've got to make that happen here on Oxford Street, because it ain't going to happen because of anything other than because of that effort.
What you said, Lawrence, ties into a couple of questions that came in from the community. But would Alex or Clover like to respond to what Lawrence said?
I might just jump in to say it is so critically important the work that Qtopia is doing, and I really encourage everybody to support them and work with them. I remember that the city did give space to Mardi Gras for a Mardi Gras museum. I remember having a great chat with Jake Shears from Sister Sisters there when he was in town and he signed my t-shirt. Mardi Gras then handed it back. They said they don't want this space anymore. So, you know, it has to be a clear plan from the community. The city has made it abundantly clear they are open to any business proposal, and have indicated their support for this sort of space. I have made it clear constantly that I will go to state government and get them to chip in funding as well to make it happen. We should also go to Tanya and Tanya Purposek and Dave Sharma and get commitments from the federal government. The city does a great deal to support our community through the challenges of the marriage equality campaign, through to support for non-government organisations. We need to see the same commitment from our state and federal colleagues to support and fund our community. This type of proposal, to make it lasting, to make it enduring, we need to make sure that it has support of all levels of government and is welcoming, as I said, of all parts of our community.
So, thank you.
Yes. So, as I said to you in my first comment, the planning proposals are on exhibition now till the 5th of November, and if you haven't made a submission, you should do that. And the social and cultural strategy is going to be developed in coming months, and we want to hear from you about that. The museum, the Pride Museum, comes up before every election and then disappears after it. It usually comes up from candidates who don't get elected or don't mention it after the election. But it has critically been an issue where the community has not been there to say we want to do this, we have the volunteers, we'll put the time in, we'll put the work in, and I understand that could be an issue in Victoria too, where it has had support to get it up and going, but it won't continue unless the community comes in and the volunteers are there and people want to do it. And I think the approach that David is taking with Qtopia is a sign of hope that he's going to organise and get that voluntary and community support, because particularly given the AIDS theme that you were so closely associated with, and so many of the people you still know were also, and they are very keen to make sure that happens, and they want to be involved. So that's a real sign that there is an opportunity, and that space that we made available to Mardi Gras for that Pride Museum is still there too. So it really is up to the community to let us know exactly how important this is, and whether or not you actually want to put time into it, because that's the strength of it. If the community doesn't want to put time into it, it won't succeed. And look, I just say also that a big issue, a big consideration for the city since I've been mayor is the fact that the city was becoming too expensive to artists to be able to work here. And we think it's very important to support our artists and creators to have a place in the city. And so that is why we have made spaces available in the buildings we own in Oxford Street for artists, and that has been going successfully since 2012. And one of the undertakings we sought from Ashbourne when we signed the lease with them, and it's a QVB type lease where they can reactivate those buildings, they can give them back life and bars and restaurants and a hotel and uses that will bring business and life back into Oxford Street, which has been languishing so much. They have also undertaken to us, although we insisted on it as part of the lease, that those creative spaces would be retained. so that artists would have a place. The cultural life of the city is also very important. And you know, for me, over all of these years being a representative of this area and of the community, I have always seen creativity and the arts very much associated with the LGBTQI community, actually. And I think that having those studios available there is very much part of the contribution to your community as well.
Thanks, Clara.
Thank you. I actually agree with a number of the comments that have been said here and reiterate that from a Sydney World Pride perspective, but for the community support, we would not have won Sydney World Pride. And the way we did that, we had a very modest bid budget, and I know compared to our competitors who had a significant bid budget, the reason that we won was because our community came together and supported us and volunteered hundreds of hours to do so. As Sydney World Pride, we now work very closely with ACON, with 2010, with the Star Observer. The power of the community coming together cannot be underestimated, and to both the Lord Mayor's point and to Lawrence's point, if this is something that community tell us that they want to do, then as CEO of World Pride, I'm happy to say that for World Pride, we will be activating Oxford Street. We want to hear what you want from us. We want to hear what you want to see, but the power of us coming together cannot be underestimated. And sometimes I think it's too simplistic to look at others, whether it be the state government, the local government, the federal government. Yes, they each have a role to play, but it is us as a community who can really shape this narrative and shape the outcome that we wanted. We would not have won World Pride and bringing the globe to Sydney had it not been for the people in this room and in our community. And so if this is what we want to see, then we need to come together and let's activate and advocate together. So I completely agree with you. This is a team effort, as I always say to my group. But if we want to do this, I think it's too simplistic to look just at the council or the state government. We really need to drive this and shape the outcome. And this is why your work is just so incredible, David. And if you need our support, then you come and reach out to us, because if this is what the community want, then let's get it.
Thank you. Thanks, Kate. Can I just say that I took advice from, when we first started doing our discussions about utopia, I spoke to Larry from the council, and I have to say I went away feeling quite despondent, because he told us all about all the past mistakes and how things don't work. And I thought, grief, what on earth have I taken on? But then I woke up the next morning and I thought, no, that's fantastic knowledge. He's given us knowledge, and the two things he gave us were the financial aspect had never been taken into consideration properly, but the most important, which you were all talking about now, is the community and the volunteering. The volunteers are so important. So what we did, we reached out to one of the most successful museums in Australia, and that's the Sydney Jewish Museum. They have an incredible volunteer program, and they have been so supportive of us. We sat down with them for many hours discussing their program, and they have actually given us their program to use for a volunteer program. So we have that basis to use for the community. Now we need people to come forward and be added to that registrar, so when we need that help, when we need that community help, we've got it. But we have the structure there, and that was something that was missing so many years ago. We have structure.
Great, thank you. I might put forward our audience submitted questions, perhaps to you, Alex. Lockouts and lockdowns have seen iconic venues like Arc close for good. How can we rebuild from this?
Well, I want to just acknowledge the importance of these bars, nightclubs, restaurants, and entertainment spaces to our community. It's where a lot of us have met, have got together, we've socialised, and where we importantly have felt safe. Obviously, the hospitality sector in particular has been hit hard by the COVID pandemic, and that has resulted in some of our beloved venues closing. I can't stress enough the importance of making sure you are participating in the city's planning process, because this helps to define and scope some of that work out, both the LGBTI cultural process, but also the planning process, which is critically important. Important is also that we support our venues that we love and that we don't take them for granted. It is great to see activations happening at Universal and that being extremely popular. It's great to see the significant investment that's going to be happening in the Kinsella's precinct. It's great to see Stonewall still doing well, and I know we all want to make sure Palms is protected and the Oxford. We have to make sure that we really change the narrative about Oxford Street from, the venues are closing down, to supporting the venues and celebrating and coming back to the clubs. But that's obviously not the only spaces that our community gathers in, and that's not the only sort of spaces that we need to make sure are protected. I know sex on premises venues have been particularly hit tough during the COVID pandemic. And I know that the suggestions have been made. I think I may be stealing your idea, Robert, but I think you had raised a suggestion in a forum about, let's make sure that those are considered to be cultural infrastructure throughout the city's planning processes. That's something I support. That's a submission I will be making to the city, that we actually look to define all sorts of spaces as cultural and community spaces, including sex on premises spaces, saunas, etc. Because that is also an important place where our community gathers. So we've got to make sure we're not just talking about one centre, one space. We've got to make sure we're not just talking about one club. We have to make sure that we're talking about an entire precinct, a diversity of venues, and using the work that the city is doing to make sure we protect that now and into the future.
Thank you. Geez, if Palms was to go down, I'd be a wreck.
We all
every year my lesbian soccer club just has a no harder.
I was there in the opening night at Palms.
Oh wow.
That's how old I am.
Mark, can I speak to that
Please
very
do.
briefly? What I say about the city of Sydney is in no way directed as a dig at the Lord Mayor, and I think it's I say that up front because the Lord Mayor is the chair of the board. She's not the CEO. She does not micromanage her organization. Legally, she can't, and so I do think that the observation that I would make about Oxford Street is that there is not enough promotion and energy put into promoting our precinct as an LGBTQI precinct 24/7, around the clock, always and forever. And talk of a creative cultural precinct is nice and lovely, but we need to make sure that we are talking this space up as a queer space, because that is what's going to bring the business owners in. That's what's going to bring the tourists in. That is the reason that a diverse range of people are going to come here. And Alex is absolutely right. Saying that it's dead just kills it.
Thank you.
So therefore, it's about talking it up. And that is what the city has tried to do, Lawrence, for many years. I just want to say that I think there have been challenges. And we all know what they are. And many main streets have faced this. That Clearway went in with no consultation or reference to the city or to me as a local member at the time. And that fast-moving, thundering traffic has created a hostile environment. So that's been one issue. So you don't have outdoor dining where other places where you can meet and socialise, particularly in post-pandemic times. This is something that we really need to do. And as Alex said at the beginning, at the same time as the Clearway, we got Westfield at either end, because shopping was a lot of things that people like to do in Oxford Street, whether it was Paddington or Darlinghurst. And then we had online shopping. And then the proposal that Lawrence referred to, which was the grocery proposal, that fell through because of the GLC in 2007. Then we had Barry O'Farrell on the lockout laws. Then we had the pandemic lockdown. So, this street, and like many other streets, but this street particularly, has gone through a whole number of challenging, hard times. And I think we're at a point now where there is a real scope for optimism. And I think the Ash Morgan proposal is part of that. I think the the proposal on the Paddington Twin site is also a part of that. Both of those are going to involve entertainment and small bars and hotels and the sorts of things that bring people in and keep people in the area. I think the other thing, addressing the hostility of the street, it has taken years, but I've now got an undertaking from government that the street will be 40 k's, the traffic will be slowed down. People won't be able to tear through to get to Dover Heights anymore. They're going to have to do it slowly because this is a place for people, not for people passing through. As well as that, we're going ahead with the separated bike path on the northern side of the street. We had looked at the centre initially, got feedback to say no, it was to go to the side, and so that's what we're doing, and consultation's happening about that right now, from the 25th of October on, and so get involved in that too. So the other vision we have for Oxford Street is to reduce, and this is of course into the future, but to reduce the lanes of traffic and get more greenery in there, calming, place for people, place where people want to spend time, daytime and nighttime. And if it's to become a 24-hour street, we want daytime and we want nighttime opportunities for people to be here and building the community, but also building the creativity and cultural use of the street too. So I think there is a real chance here for many things coming together and there are the planning controls that we're doing, there's the social and cultural strategy that we're doing. Get involved in all of those things so you get the outcome you want for the street. Thanks.
Great, thank you. David, do you have anything to say to that in terms of the idea of making somewhere like Oxford Street a 24/7 sort of entertainment precinct with a clear, kind of theme to it? Like, do you think we should get rid of the clearways or, the designated bus lanes? Like, how do you kind of... Yeah.
Well, I would love to see Oxford Street calm down. I think that was a word you used, wasn't it? I'd love to see it calm down. I'd love to see...
Anyone calm down, be dead.
Not the people.
No, the traffic. Sorry, the traffic. No, absolutely. No. More people. I'd like to see bigger pavements, less traffic going through. Sorry?
There's no one there anyway. Why do you want wider footpaths?
Because we want people to come back. Not speeding traffic racing through.
The traffic's 40 already. Has been for a long time. They've been booked. I didn't even know.
It's just being
It's
introduced.
a dust bowl that no one wants to stop in.
I'd like to just give a shout out to the former Transport Minister Andrew Constance, who really took the Lord Mayor and my concerns about Oxford Street really seriously. The first time we had a Transport Minister who was prepared to slow down the traffic. So why that is important is when you slow down the traffic get rid of the clearway and slow down the traffic, and then investing in the cycleway allows for street beautification work, allows for outdoor dining and activation. With that has come a commitment from the state government to provide grants to shops to make sure that they can have outdoor dining spaces. Those $5,000 grants are they're open in November, and other significant investments. So I respect your passion, sir, but we really need to see this as an amazing opportunity for Oxford Street, where we have the traffic being slowed down. We have significant private investment coming into Oxford Street. We have a significant focus from the state and local government to support Oxford Street to flourish into the future. We have a significant project by Utopia, which is looking at building an LGBTQI space. So, if you want to sit and complain about it, that's up to you. My job as an elected representative will be to support it, celebrate, and to make sure that there is proper funding now and into the future. And this is a really exciting time for Oxford Street. So let's stop talking it down and let's start talking it up.
Yes, please.
I just want to add to that. Some of you might remember that Burdekin Crown Streets used to be one way with thundering traffic. No one wanted to spend any time on the footpath in Crown Street. No one wanted to spend any time on the footpath on Burke Street. That all changed when the traffic went two-way and the street got calmed. Crown Street now, particularly...
25 years ago.
Crown Street now.
No, nothing since.
Crown Street now is a really terrific street in terms of people spending time in it and people dining out in
hear
it.
about
And
Oxford.
Hey, show some respect. Show some respect.
hear about Oxford.
Please show some respect. The Lord Mayor of Sydney has supported our community at times when no elected official was willing to. And now she is trying to explain to you the significant investment made into Oxford Street. Please at least show some respect. Please show some respect.
There's been no investment.
Please, sir,
Can you
please.
wait till it's over to make your point, sir?
We'll come to the audience questions later on, so we'll just continue on with our panel conversation for the minute, but thank you.
But could I just say that there's been investment since 2006. 2006 we repaved the streets, we underground the power lines, we put in smart poles, we put in the carry the banners and the baskets of flowers which have beautified the streets. That's there now. We've been spending money in the streets since 2006, but it has had serious challenges that I have just mentioned. And I think now we're reaching a point where I think we can have optimism about the future, and I think that's what we should be focusing on. And the reason why I mentioned Burdekin Crown streets is they were streets that really languished, and now they're streets that are really flourishing. Just walk down them anytime and see. Potential for Oxford Street is there too.
I'm going to agree with the Lord Mayor and say, as a 20-year resident of Darlinghurst who's suffered through the construction of God knows how many billions of dollars worth of tunnels, we were promised and told that those tunnels would take the cars off of the roads so that we could pedestrianize our streets, and all we have is buses barreling down the middle. I hosted a forum, I believe Alex, you were on it, where we asked the question: could the light rail run down the middle of Oxford Street instead of down Devonshire Street? Why doesn't it bring back the Bondi Trail? I mean, the Oxford Street is a travesty from Hyde Park all the way up to Centennial Park. It's a planning disaster, and the state government has a lot to answer for. Alex.
It does, but now it's changing. I want to just stress that. The bike lane's going down, the streets being calm, that will make a real difference. And the light rail should have gone up Oxford Street, and that was our position. The government made the decision that it was going to go up Devonshire Street. And really, if you stood back and thought about where light rail should go, the last street you put it in would be Devonshire Street, but that's where it is now. It should be in Oxford Street. It should still be in Oxford Street, going to Bondi. But at least we're going to get calm traffic, and we're going to get the bike lane, and we're going to get widen street.
Can I say, Mon, as someone who organises events, I think that this is a multifaceted approach. Again, to my point earlier, we cannot just look at planning controls as a means to reactivate the city. Yes, it is but one mechanism that we can use. Placemaking is exceptionally important, but we need to have events here and events at different bars which represent the diversity of our community, so that the diversity of our community feels safe and represented and included in these spaces. So I'm not going to get into the detail and the minutiae of planning controls, not my area of expertise. However, as someone who organises events and loves attending events, I think we need to look at other ways that we can activate this street. Again, the Lord Mayor and the city unequivocally have been exceptionally supportive of Mardi Gras. We would not be able to hold Mardi Gras without the city's support, and we certainly wouldn't be having Royal Pride without the city's support. So my challenge to the community is, what other events can we host and hold here which activate the area? We talked about this particular venue. When I was 19, I came here and watched Kate Munro play on the rooftop. Quite seminal. I then went down to the Lord Roberts and saw another DJ, and then I came back to the Columbian where I'd started. Why? Because these venues had different events for different people. And so I think looking at the planning controls is but one lever that we can pull. We need to look at this as in a holistic solution and in a holistic way. Diversity of programming and diversity of events.
Okay, I'm going to stick with you because this community question relates to Mardi Gras. Someone asked, will Mardi Gras shifting its event away from Oxford Street for a second year impact the long-term identity of Oxford Street?
This is a great question. I'm really pleased you asked that. We did not, and I have to say that I'm the CEO of World Pride now. I'm not the CEO of Mardi Gras, and I'm no longer on the board of Mardi Gras, so I don't want to speak on behalf of Mardi Gras. Safe to say that Albert and I work hand in glove, day in and day out. I spoke to him this morning about this panel. We did not, and I'm saying as a community, move our parade from Oxford Street for any other reason than it was a health concern and we needed to comply with government regulations. Oxford Street, and listen to me when I say this, I have said it 5 times already. Oxford Street is the spiritual home of Mardi Gras. For 2023, and I'm happy to say this publicly, and I've said it before, it is absolutely our intention for 2023 to be marching up this street. If I have anything to do with it, we will be marching up this street and we will end in one of the arenas. We will have a capacity issue here in 23 because I understand that half of the world is coming to Sydney. Hurrah!
As a follow-up, I'll put this to the Lord Mayor. A community member asks, last year the Lord Mayor proposed closing off Oxford Street following the SCG event for a street party. Is there any chance this will happen?
Well, the state agencies didn't agree with that then, and I don't believe they're going to agree with it now. It's a pity, and you know, the community really wants Mardi Gras back in Oxford Street, and 2023 will be the year one.
Let's hope so.
Hell or high water.
Thank you. I want to come back to that idea of diversity and ensuring that diverse viewpoints are represented, particularly when we're talking about the future of Oxford Street. Perhaps this is one for Alex or for the Lord Mayor. Again, how will we ensure that diverse viewpoints, you know, can form part of this plan for the future of Oxford Street?
Well, I think it is critical to make space for those parts of our rainbow that don't always feel comfortable to come to an environment like this or to a venue like this. It's important for us to make sure we're doing, you know, outreach and work with trans and gender diverse people, intersex people, with asexual and bisexual people. It's going to be critical that we have a strong voice of people of colour as well throughout this process. So what we need to do, what I should have done, was I probably should have said I'm not going to be on this panel unless those voices were represented. So I apologise for that. That's what I should have done. But we need to make sure that we have another panel, Lawrence. I know this one was really hard to organise through COVID, but where we are directly hearing from those voices. And those voices are obviously being encouraged through outreach to participate in the city's planning processes. And it's really important for us sometimes to take a step back and to make sure that we are supporting other people and those other voices to be heard. So I think it's incumbent on all of us. Why it is particularly important, particularly for trans and gender diverse people, to have a strong voice and to be supported by our community, is because that is the part of our community that is in the crosshairs of the target of legislation from Mark Levin and One Nation, and at a federal level from elements within the Morrison government. We need to be making sure, as important as Oxford Street is, as important as it is to protect spaces, we also have to make sure we are protecting our community, and our community is under threat legislatively. We have proposals in New South Wales government and in federal government which will wind back our rights, which will target and impact trans and gender diverse young people in particular. So we have a lot of work to do. I know David and I know Clover and Lawrence and other people here have been through so many battles. We can't give that up. We can never take things for granted, and we also have to be careful that, you know, we don't think everything's just going to be fine, because it's not.
Thank you.
I did say at the beginning that we've been flying our rainbow banners proudly up and down Oxford Street since 2005, and we are now changing to the Progress Pride flag, both to fly at Town Hall, to fly at Town Square, and to put in our banners, because we are proud that the City of Sydney is not just a tolerant city, it's an accepting city, it's an inclusive city. And we will continue to promote that, just as we're promoting the fact that refugees are welcome here too. So I think this is, And, you know, many people think that the Mardi Gras now is just a glamour thing because we've won all the fights. But as Alex said, we haven't, and it's incredible how the move to the right is happening right across the globe now, which is tragic really, given all the wins that have been made, particularly here in Sydney. And so it is really, really important that you stay vigilant and support those who support accepting, inclusive communities.
Yeah, thank you.
Those events that you used to go to that don't happen, I assume are probably financially difficult to happen. And I can't help but go back to this plan, which basically asked for support for diverse events and programming. I think that some of these things are not going to happen commercially because there's just not enough money in it for a venue, so they have to be supported through grants, through beneficence. And there needs to be a way and a structure. Hopefully, the new reference panel that you're putting together will have that reference so that these things can happen. Because good to hear not everyone's home with their Yule.
The thing is, Lawrence, you know we have a grant system, and if people want to put on events, they can apply to our grants, and that's where the community is doing its own thing, supported by our grants. So it's really important that you investigate that and make the submissions to be a part of that.
I'd echo the comment about grants, but I'd also go back to the comment I said earlier about the community coming together. The diversity of programming is one thing, but Alex touched on safety, which is a big concern for our community, particularly our trans community and our First Nations community. I do think it's incumbent upon those who can to really show and represent people or lift up people who have never or haven't been represented as much as they should have. And certainly, again, speaking with my World Pride hat on, we know that our First Nations community, and particularly our queer First Nations community, is significantly underrepresented, which is why we have, and everything that we do at Sydney World Pride has a First Nations lens to it. One of the first people I hired was our First Nations engagement manager, and for the first time in I think Australian history, but certainly in Pride history, we have two creative directors. We have a First Nations creative director and we have a festival creative director, and they are effectively co-directors. And so that everything that we do has that diversity lens. If we want to invite the world to our city, we need to reflect the world. And the world isn't just a few of us on a Sunday afternoon here, but the other thing I would say to that is we are here today because we care. We might not all agree, but we all have the same vision and care about Oxford Street. So I think that's really important to remember. Again, for me, it's around diversity of programming, inclusion, safety, and all parts of our beautifully diverse community.
Can I just say something too? With Qtopia, we were very, very aware of this diversity and inclusion. We've reached out to Black, and I can't say yet, but they're very, very eager to join the board as directors, and there are possibly trans people who are from Black who are very interested. We are reaching out to the trans community. We have a possible trans architect if we get into the stage of developing something. So we are absolutely committed to that. Diversity, inclusiveness, and that's what we stand for. So I agree totally, Kate, Clover and Alex, with what you're saying.
When you say Black, is that the BLAQ
Yes,
Black?
yes.
So they're a queer Indigenous organisation.
Some people may not know what that is, sorry.
They're a fantastic organisation.
Yeah, they're fantastic people, they're really tremendous. And they've been very supportive of Qtopia.
Wonderful, thank you. Before we open the floor to our audience who are here today, I'm going to put one more community question to the panel. It's kind of a lateral question, I think. This person asks, I'm curious to know if any Oxford Street redevelopment contingency plans have been explored. Maybe there could be a plan to return the Oxford Street redevelopment site to accessible parkland. The settlements of the site's once natural environment, like was rapidly achieved down at Barangaroo. Has there been any thinking along these lines?
I think you're greening the streets. That's very much a 2050 plan. Reducing the traffic lanes, increasing the landscaping, making more room for people.
Thank you. Okay.
Can I just...
Yes?
That question, I think at its core, is asking, does Oxford Street need more development? And I think that there's an existential question that the community should think about. And I'm not going to venture my opinion, but there is vacancy in the CBD. People are working more and more from home and not coming in. And so, I mean, clearly Ash Morgan thinks that they can invest tens of millions of dollars and fill the space. But if they can't, well, then we have taller buildings and even more vacancy. So that, I think, is the existential question. And blowing up the buildings and putting in parkland. Well, maybe that'll happen actually one day, but I'm not going to go there.
We've got Hyde Park at one end and Centennial Park at the other end. I think if people want to spend time in the parkland, it's very accessible.
Mel, just down here first, please, and then we'll come to the gentleman up the back, because I believe this flows on from what we're talking about. You've had your hand up for a little bit, sir.
Well, yes, I had my hand up because that was my question, but I only covered a very small part of it.
Yes, sorry, you wrote a lot. It was a bit of a
I
between
covered many things. I'll focus on that particular item. I'm old enough to remember sites in Sydney, like, I don't know if anyone can remember the old Anthony Hortons or the Chevron site, like down in Darlinghurst Road and all of that, and they were getting redeveloped. But then, years and years, they were just vacant building sites. So I thought if the bulldozers moved in here, and we live in such a world of transition, and all sorts of things are coming through this decade of disruption, if everything sort of collapsed, we might just be left with these prestigious empty facades and either building site or vacant blocks, and that won't look good for Pride 2023, will it? Yeah, that was my question.
Okay. No worries. Any additional responses to that?
So I think the aim is to incentivise any developer that wants to create a new business in Oxford Street. We are giving incentives if it will have a creative or cultural use. As I said at the beginning, this has been a strong policy of ours. We have seen how difficult it is for our creators and our artists to be able to work in the city, being driven out of the city, and we think it's important to create space for them. So we're incentivising any development applications that are put in as part of the renewal of the street. And it's really about, and then that will attract, other creators we expect, if it's given that theme. And as I said before, I think the LGBTQI community is very much part of all of that, a creative community.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. There was a gentleman up the back, and then over there, and then over there. So I've got my own.
Thank you, Kia ora. My name's Sean Fleetner. I've lived in Darlinghurst 25 years. I hold a document under the name of Andrew Thomas, Executive Manager, Planning and Development, City of Sydney, dated 22 September 2021. The significance of that document, and it's here for anybody who wants to see it, is that Lawrence, who publishes the Sydney Star Observer, is telling the absolute truth when he says that the Ash Morgan proposal has nothing whatsoever to offer us in the gay community, because this document, which is on behalf of the City of Sydney, supports Ash Morgan, and it makes a point of having not one word, I repeat, not one word in this document by the leader of Executive Manager, Planning and Development. The Ash Morgan proposal was homophobic. The definition of homophobia is running down the street bashing pufters like me, or in the 21st century, putting through a policy that ignores us, that makes us marginal, that makes us unreal, that says you are not going to have a space. So Lawrence is telling the truth, because this document whitewashes us right out. Talk about homophobic, talk about...
So just so we can get to other questions.
Okay, the question is this. Firstly, anybody who wants to see it, I hold it here. Secondly, my question to the Lord Mayor and my question to the member for Sydney, are you both, after this meeting, going to publicly declare that any and all development proposals for Oxford Street must have a Rainbow Plus component? If the answer is yes, that's great. If the answer is no, why not? And I want your answers now, please.
I have said throughout this meeting, yes. And I have said throughout my 10 years in elected office, yes. And, you know, I have supported so many proposals for dedicated LGBTQI spaces. But we haven't actually seen a proper funded model or a plan. You talk about the Ashwaubenon Pride Centre. I'm not sure who was proposing that. I'm not sure any LGBTI organisations were promoting it or a part of it. Certainly none of them raised it with me. When people come to me to seek support for infrastructure for our community, that is what I am a dog with a bone with. Whether it was support from the state government for World Pride, whether it was support for ACON for their health centre, $3 million allocated in the last budget. I am always here to support our community as a member of our community to make sure that we have safe spaces. You know, and what we are trying to do here today is carve out that really exciting future for our community by putting in place mechanisms which has been a successful model throughout our city. If you have a look at the public domain in places like Green Square and other places where you see private investment coming in, helping to really renew an area and deliver community benefit through it. And of course we want to see that community benefit to be LGBTQI spaces. But those spaces, as I have said throughout this, have to be fully welcoming and fully inclusive of all of our community, and we need to make sure that that proper work and proper consultation is done so we have places not only, you know, for the future and for future generations.
Does that include Ashwaubenon?
It includes every site.
So the answer is yes.
The answer is yes, and I'm offended you would assume the answer from me would ever be no, to be honest.
Well, we haven't heard the point is that the Ashwaubenon proposal whitewashes us out, and I haven't seen you yet publicly state, as local member of parliament, I am against the Ashwaubenon proposal unless and until it is pro-rainbow community. Because Ashwaubenon at $60 million, the 3 blocks of Oxford Street needs to be dealt with in detail, please.
So there are two things going on at the city at the moment. One is looking at new planning controls. Now those planning controls deal with a framework for land use and development by setting height and density controls and setting what kinds of activities can take place there. That's what I expect Andrew Thomas's document is about. We have a lease with Ashwaubenon, similar to the lease that the city's had with the QBB. I don't know if you remember back when a former mayor was going to demolish the QBB and put a car park there. And I don't know if any of you have done a bit of history and seen what the QBB was like before the city in the 80s took it on and leased it to Eco Gardens to renew it. We were looking at a similar sort of proposal with Ashwaubenon, where they're going to renew those buildings, those historic heritage buildings in Oxford Street, and put uses in there which will generate business and activity for a street that's languished for a couple of decades. So that's what Ashwaubenon is about. They're developers that are taking on creating, restoring, renovating those important heritage buildings. It's about, whereas the controls that we're looking at are about land use and built form and height and density. So but in terms of the cultural, the social activities that are going to happen in Oxford Street, this is the strategy that we're developing now and want to be in consultation with you. And that will be there, that will be where we'll be able to see the uses that you're talking about be developed in Oxford Street if there is support for it.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Quick response and then another question.
Very quickly, 83% of people surveyed have already said that preserving the LGBTQI component of this precinct is essential and important. Alice, you asked the question as to who was proposing a Pride Center. Well, what's clear is that the people who are proposing a creative and cultural center aren't proposing a queer use, and that is what is of concern, and that is what you're hearing from the community in different guises. That we would like to see that assurance in that direction, because this infrastructure that used to be council owned and managed. Once upon a time, those assets were used by our community. Back in the old days, when South Sydney Council ran these buildings, they leased to community groups. In and around the time of the GFC and the great supermarket dream, all of the various community organizations were tossed out, including the Star Observer, from one of these buildings, and that building has sat vacant for a number of years. I personally support the city's plans to lease out the buildings. I think the city did an awful job of managing these buildings, and there's no reflection on the Lord Mayor. It is every reflection on Town Hall and the bureaucracy there. When the council asked if, when the CEO asked me as the president of the Darlinghurst Business Partnership, did I think that the city should buy the T2 building, I said, please don't. You have a failed history of managing buildings on the street. I support the privatization. I just think our community needs to be a part of and central to the plans.
Thank you. We have some
Just
patient,
going back to what Lawrence is saying.
Okay, very good.
That's why the city is leasing it, because the city doesn't, it's not the city's work to lease out buildings, to run buildings, to manage buildings. And the QVB has been a real success, and I think what Ash Lloyd was doing can be a real success. But getting that LGBTIQ use in there is what we can do via the social and cultural strategy that we're now working on.
Okay, we've got some very patient audience members over here. Mel, I don't want you to get a sore shoulder because you had your hand up there for a while. Is that 4 people I've spotted? Yep.
Okay, my question is about Taylor Square and the built environment of Taylor Square, which is the focal point of Oxford Street. It's hard to think of a more important part of Oxford Street. It's been languishing with a renovation that was an absolute failure some 16 years ago, and Clover, you have been our mayor all that time, and nothing's been changed about the poor design work there. It's very hard to imagine it as a meeting space, or the areas around it as a meeting space where people would want to go to when it is in such a miserable state. Part of the design work that was put into it was discouraging homeless people from congregating there, but it generally discourages everyone from wanting to visit this precinct. It's something that is completely within your furlough. It is something completely controlled by you. You can choose to renovate Taylor Square. You have chosen for
Please, out of respect to everyone who'd like to ask a question, can you please get to the question?
Not to for a very long time. It would make a big difference to all the businesses in the area and to the community that depends upon this area if it was finally renovated to the state that it should be as one of the most significant squares in the whole of the inner city. What are you going to do?
Look, I think you're talking about an area that has major traffic routes through it, Oxford Street and Flinders Street, and they're roads owned by the state, as you would know. South Sydney Council did work over a 7-year period on the southern side of Taylor Square, and the northern side of Taylor Square has been paved and again landscaped, and there are future plans when the Supreme Court decides to relocate and we are able to have an arts use on that side, and that might be the opportunity to better integrate Taylor Square. But it is very, very hard to integrate Taylor Square and turn it into a Trafalgar Square because it has all this traffic running right through the middle of it. And that's been a great challenge. Work has been done on both the northern and southern sides, but we have the traffic there, and that's the issue.
Isn't it a much design though? Isn't it an unfriendly design? Isn't it an unfriendly friendly design that is very appropriate for such a significant square with such a significant social role.
I agree, but we have to
But why
be
not
able to
improve
get,
that design?
well, because we don't own Flinders Street and we don't own Oxford Street.
I'm
and
talking
we have
about
to
the square yeah.
The square on the northern side or the southern side?
Both sides.
Well, on both sides, they've both had work done to them, they've both been paved and they
Not in
have...
16 years, not since this design, which is very flawed, which has dreadful street furniture. It has huge screws as bollards. It has...
Again, sir, we've got a number of questions that we'd like to get to in the audience. Would anyone else like to comment?
I can have a further conversation with you because there are 2050 plans to try and integrate all of that and dramatically reduce the traffic and incorporate the Supreme Court precinct as well. There is real potential there, but it does depend on what happens in the courts and what happens with the traffic. And we have to be able to work very constructively with the state. Already had discussions with the Minister of the Arts about this. And I understand what you're saying. I'm happy to talk some more to you later.
Thank you. Gentleman up the back.
Hi, my name's Gary Wotherspoon, and I think one factor we're missing in all this, we are not born into our community. If you're Vietnamese, you're born into it. If you're Italian, if you're Jewish, you are. We come to an understanding of what we are, puberty or somewhere around there. So Oxford Street or some spiritual place, as Kate talks about, is very important for all our communities. So the idea that we should develop some centre of whatever form which will, in the future, bring all our communities back to Oxford Street is, I think, a very important something to underline everything we're talking about today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Those are called a lovely comment. Any further thoughts on that?
Just a huge thank you to Gary for his strong advocacy for our community always and for chronicling it so well and for his passion of our community. So thank you for that. Thank you for that comment.
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
I echo that too. Thank you, Gary.
Thank you, Clever.
Here, but the other thing is...
Please,
thank you, Clever. Yvonne Weldon. Just wanted to know, you've been you're trying to get your second decade. You've had this plan for over a decade, but I heard you speak about flowers and flags. What I'd like to hear is about what is the real action that's going to take place. We've seen real estate that's sat idle. I know that you've got this lease arrangement, which is going to cost the city even more. So how much more of the commitment and how much more of the people that are going unheard, because you are hearing people here today, what difference is actually going to be put in action? And it's not so much yourself, as you said, that it's not your responsibility. I'm a little bit confused about that. So if it's not your responsibilities, who is it? Thank you.
Yeah.
I don't really know what to make of that question, Yvonne. I have gone some lengths to talk about the challenges that we've had in Oxford Street and the fact we started doing work in Oxford Street back in 2006. I've talked about that. Talked about what the future holds and how I have optimism about that. I don't have anything else to add.
Okay, this is I'll come back to you in a second. This is a question that's come through from our Facebook audience. We are streaming live on the platform today. This person asks, are we ever likely to see Oxford Street return to 80s and 90s? A mix of not just, so multiple use, not just alcohol focus. I think that's the sentiment of that question. Who would like to have a crack at that one?
I'll start. I really hope so, and that's why I talk about the need for a diversity of spaces and a diversity of offerings on Oxford Street, supported and underpinned by a strong plan from the City of Sydney, which the work is obviously being done in a very detailed way now. Absolutely. So I know there seems to be a bit of tension and a bit of negativity in the room. I am really positive about the future of Oxford Street. We have now significant investment from the state government into Oxford Street. We have street beautification work as a result of the cycleway. We have traffic being calmed down. We have significant private investment in Oxford Street, in the Kinsella site, the Ashmorgan site and other sites. This is an exciting time for our community. This is an exciting time for Oxford Street. And as a result of the work being done now by both local and state government and the private sector, we can get back to those 80s and 90s days on the Strip, absolutely. But as I said, we've got to participate in the process. We've got to make sure we are supporting those venues. We've got to make sure we're creating an Oxford Street for the future, which reflects the entire diversity of the rainbow. This is an exciting time for Oxford Street. So yes, let's go, and let's not think about the 80s and the 90s. Let's make the 2020s really what we will see as the heyday for Oxford Street in the future.
Thank you. Any more questions?
Hi, my name is Karen Fryer. Thank you so much for today and for this opportunity to discuss the future of Oxford Street. I just want to build upon the report that Lawrence referenced earlier on in his presentation. That was a report that was released in 2009, a report that was commissioned by the City of Sydney that described Oxford Street as having lost its mojo. Now, 12 years on, I would probably say that Oxford Street still doesn't have its mojo. Clover, you've been in charge for those 12 years. You identified 12 years ago that Oxford Street had lost its mojo. Why should we believe you now? The sign's not cooperating, is it? Anyway, going back to that, Clover, why should we believe you now? That's 12 years of reports, analysis. Yes, there's a point at which, I haven't finished yet, there's a point at which, you can blame the clearways, you can blame Westfield, you can blame Covert, you can blame the lockout laws, but at the end of the day, you have been the Lord Mayor for 17 years. You have been the majority of this property for that time, and we have watched as this strip has gone on a decline. Now, isn't there a point at which you go, I need to accept responsibility for what has happened?
So we did do that report that Lawrence has there, and as a result of that, we did enable very many artists and creatives to set up and work in those properties that we own. That has been very, very successful, and the good news is that Ash Morgan has undertaken to continue that subsidised creative cultural space in the new development. And having those creatives on the street was terrific, using local facilities. But we've already talked about the problems of the past, and I agree with Alex about talking about optimism for the future. And I think now, given we're going to be able to address the hostility of Oxford Street in terms of the traffic and the calming opportunities that are now happening, it's taken a very long time for Transport for New South Wales to agree to all of that. That is now happening, and I think we're into a really new and exciting renewal period. We're dealing with placemaking, we're dealing with city making, we're dealing with change that happens in cities. And I was the member for Bly in the Oxford Street office back at the end of the 80s and through the 90s. And at the beginning of my tenure as member for Bly, Oxford Street was very exciting. But then we went through the 90s, and it was pretty heartbreaking actually, because it was the centre of the AIDS epidemic, and it wasn't just bars and fun and excitement as it had been earlier on. It became quite tragic, and it was candlelight marches down Oxford Street to vigils being held in Hyde Park. That dominated so much of that period of the 90s, and I think that's what David is going to commemorate in this space that he's talking about, getting up, and that is very, very important too, because that is and I have thought about that a lot during this last pandemic, because this last pandemic has been very reminiscent, except we lost a whole community at that time. And the Star Observer every week was reporting on the people who had died. So, that was a very sad period, and we've gone through a period of a serious impact on retail for those reasons we've already discussed today. But now we're talking about a new period. And I agree with Alex, we need to be talking it up and doing everything we can to get it happening in a way that we would like. And that includes having that strong presence of the GBLTQ
Queer community, we struggle with it.
Outside of Harpswell, I'll just have to stick with queer.
Can I just say, we also really can't underestimate the impact that the lockouts had on Oxford Street. They were imposed on us by the Liberal Party and the Labor Party. Oxford Street should never have been included in the lockout plan. And I remember those nights out on Oxford Street where you could go from venue to venue, where you didn't have that rush to a closure time. Those lockouts have only just been lifted. I was the deputy chair of the inquiry into the nighttime economy, and that was one of the highlights of that, was taking a group of politicians to Stonewall late at night one night and letting them sort of meet and talk to people who were there, who could see the importance of Oxford Street for our community and why it was so great that those lockouts were finally lifted as a result of some great community campaigns. But putting in those lockouts prevented things like the Oxford Art Factory from flourishing, from us having nights out where we could go to dinner and go to a club. Those are now gone. The lockdown is now gone. This is an exciting time. There is significant investment from the state and local government as well to support venues to reopen. Have a look at the support that, for example, was given to Claire's Kitchen, that awesome restaurant across the street. If you haven't been there for dinner recently, then you can't say you support Oxford Street if you haven't gone to Claire's Kitchen. It is an amazing space. So again, let's really work hard to just drop this toxic negativity. Let's talk up the future of this great street, and let's all be celebrating at World Pride 2023, dancing down the street, welcoming the world to Oxford Street, which is, as we have said, just such an important place for our community.
Thank you. We very much appreciate all of these questions and comments, but please keep in mind we have 5 very different panellists up here today who are very keen to respond to your questions. Gentlemen up the back.
Hi, Clover and Alex. Just a question about the public transport. Accessibility to Oxford Street from various areas will be cut even further when we lose the 377, for example, the 373. Trying to bring people into Oxford Street area was going to be more and more difficult. What I'm disappointed about is that I never knew any of these buses were going to be discontinued because I didn't know as part of the agreement for the light rail. How are we going to go ahead and keep these buses going to help people come to Oxford Street, to enjoy Oxford Street? And just one more question. I've noticed a couple of the benches along Oxford Street have moved. For example, the bench in front of IGA and a couple of the benches along the other side of Oxford Street. There was no notice that they were going to be gone.
They're being replaced.
That's
just a temporary thing. All the street furniture is being replaced.
All right, thank you. About public transport and buses.
Yes, so the state government has done a process of rationalising some of the transport routes that particularly impact Oxford Street. There is a consultation process underway, and I'm hoping to get this fixed. I'm hoping that we won't have those removed for both the bus stops and the routes, because we need to be making sure that as particularly we open up from the lockdown, that people can come into Oxford Street by public transport and by accessible public transport. So that's something I'm working on.
Thank you. Yes, Mr.
Hello. Yes, I'm very optimistic as well about Oxford Street. I think we look at what's happening in comparable cities overseas at the moment. The places that have opened up before us are going off. It's back like the 1920s or the 1970s. It's drugs, sex, and all sorts of new music that we haven't even thought about. But I think that's only going to happen on Oxford Street if you don't proceed with this wacky plan of facilitating development, putting hats on all the buildings. We'll have 2 stories up and 10 stories in Oxford Street, because that will lure and it already has happened, the big money, and big money is necessarily conservative. If we want to have vibrant nightlife with drugs, sex, and emerging music, we need that as safe as possible. The infrastructure is on Oxford Street for those things to happen. But if you have very, very wealthy superannuation funds trying to get a return on their dollars by buying up huge swathes of the street. It's not going to happen on Oxford Street. Your plan will backfire. It'll go elsewhere, probably even underground for these sort of parties or whatever, and we'll be actually in a worse place than if it happened organically with what we've already got.
At the risk of grabbing the mic back over to this side over here, sorry guys, you know, part of the core problem is, and Robert, you're right, that you know, you always are. It's so terrifying about you. Part of the problem here is that as the area develops and overdevelops, that the challenge is the reverse of what the Facebook questioner asked, which is how are you going to preserve the daytime economy? In fact, the real challenge and problem is going to be how do we preserve the nighttime economy? Because there will be much, much more emphasis on bringing in corporate dollars during the day. 10% of the space in the community cultural uses, not LGBT, does not fix the problem. Part of the issue that one of my prayers as a resident, I know some of my neighbors will hate me for saying this, but I personally think that Oxford Street needs to be preserved as a late night entertainment district, and that the bars should be able to be open 24/7, and that anyone who lives into this neighborhood needs to put up with the noise, put up with the inconvenience, because I moved to Darlinghurst because I was going to be close to Taylor Square, not because I was going to be in a dormitory neighborhood. That's my personal opinion.
Thanks, Lawrence. We're almost out of time. One response to that before we've got two more questions, and then I think that might be the story.
Just very quickly, a lot of people move to Darlinghurst, Lawrence, because they think they're still in Clara, and they want Clara, not Darlinghurst. And that's a constant problem that we have. We try to balance.
In response to that, I think that's a really good point, Lawrence, and I'll acknowledge Gio, who's in the audience with us. Gio was on the Big Farewell Pride with me at Mardi Gras. When we travel around the world speaking and lobbying to host World Pride, there was only one thing that kept coming back to us about Sydney, and that was around its lockout laws. So thank goodness they're no longer here. But we are acutely aware that when we're inviting the world to Sydney, we need to have a global city. And to be frank, I'm agreeing with you. If we want to have a global city, we need to have an epicenter of a place where our community can come together. Now, again, I've repeated myself a number of times, but the best way to stop bars closing down is to go to bars and to enjoy yourself and get out and have dinner and go to the bars and you know, I take your point about gentrification and for want of a better term, but I do think that it is incumbent upon us, if we don't like what we're seeing, we need to get out and enjoy those bars. Certainly, again, with my World Pride hat on, we will be activating this precinct beyond belief. We want to bring the world here, we want to party, we want to celebrate, we want to have art exhibitions, and we want people to enjoy our hospitality. So it might sound quite trite, but if you want a beer, go and have a beer.
Thank you, Pat. All right, two more questions.
Hi everyone, my name is William Chan, and I really want to talk about the next generation of LGBTIQ communities. As a young person of colour, as a member of Surf Lifesavers with Pride, it's so important that we actually think about our future, and not just who's partying right now, but what about the next generation who will be out there partying, who requires a safe space for us to really enjoy. We've talked a lot about one centre, one building, one space. What about our public spaces? What about this community where young people can feel that they can really be safe in our public space? We all know that young people who identify as LGBTIQ have a lot of mental health issues. Suicide is very high. Let's actually be optimistic. Can we actually bring some hope? You know, I love that this vision actually allows us to evolve with the community, to actually look ahead and have that foresight. because we really need spaces for the next generation, for young people. I really want to ask that question, can we change that narrative so that we can actually have a future of Oxford Street that is supportive of our young people?
Great question. Who would like to respond to that one, please?
I'm not afraid of talking. You know, part of this, what pisses me off about the cynicism that Oxford Street is dead and the narrative that runs with that we hear at the Star Observer a lot of time, which is, oh, we're already accepted in the world and Oxford Street is redundant. Well, I'll tell you what, if you get in a train, a car, or a bus and you go 15 kilometers west of there, it is scary up there. You know, 65% of the populace in a lot of those suburbs voted against marriage equality, and it's very easy for us to forget how important safe spaces like Oxford Street are. To me, as your elder young man, I believe that preserving Oxford Street as an LGBTQ center into the future is essential for the mental health, well-being, and party time for the young uns. So I think it's really important that we all step up and preserve it and do everything we can to make sure it's here.
The fight's not over, and we really need intergenerational action.
And I just say that's exactly what we aim to do at Qtopia. We are talking about now, we're talking about you people, we're talking about the future. We're talking about future generations, emerging career people. We want you to feel safe. We want you to come to our centre where you will feel safe, accepted, and looked after. So that is our aim. So we have you very firmly in mind. We haven't forgotten you. In fact, you are our future.
Thank you, David. That was a great question. One final question, a very patient man up the front.
Thank you, Andrew Woodhouse, Potts Point. Thank you to the panellists for coming today. Can I ask, why is council allowing amalgamation of sites in the plan, contrary to its own heritage conservation area guidelines, increasing height and density, effectively turning the area in what could be Bondi Junction? Surely council's original plan for a city of villages will become a city of pillages.
Thanks, Andrew. As I said, changing the planning controls is, the proposals are on exhibition till November the 5th. And I hope that everyone will give us feedback on what's there. And of course that feedback will be taken on board and there can be changes to those controls. We've had people like the former government architect Peter Mould, people like Ken Marr from a Platinum person from Hassel, giving us advice, as well as Hollenstein, the group that did the Green Square Library. So some very good people have been looking at how we can preserve the importance of the heritage of Oxford Street and its wonderful buildings, and at the same time in try and get some extra things happening there to give more life to the street because it was ambushed. So they're basically the goals there. But we do value everyone's input, and as you know, Andrew, we also respond to that input and make changes, and we can do that on this occasion as well.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Thank you so much. We could keep talking for hours. I'm mindful that the Burdekin has another event that they need to prepare for after this one. So thank you so much to our community here today. Your questions and your insights are very much appreciated. Thank you also to our panellists, Alex, Clover, Kate, Lawrence, and David. So grateful for your time today. Please continue the conversation afterwards. Thanks to Star Observer, thanks to the Burdekin. Have a good one.
And thanks to Mon and everyone, please listen to my mate Kate here and drink here. The rooftop bar is open for business and has stunning views and great beer.